Wow, time whizzes by. We're already a quarter of the way through. Another one from the USA with a wonderfully named Shareablee. I'm delighted to introduce the CEO and founder, Tania Yuki. Welcome, Tania.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I think that's...
This is the one? All right, fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. So thrilled to be here representing Shareablee at the Data Venture Challenge here at ICOM. So just to begin today's presentation, there's something of an art to creating content, but we believe that there's a science behind what drives people to take certain actions, whether it's word of mouth, sharing, or other kinds of cues. And all of this sits at the intersection of content, context, and audience segmentation, all of which is very measurable in the context of how people react and respond to messaging in social media. So just to talk a little bit about the data set that we look at, and let's take the example of 2014, in which we measured that brands and publishers created and posted nearly 30 million pieces of content across the major social networks just in the US alone. And these pieces of content sparked 42 billion engaged moments with these brands and publishers. And each of those moments created some kind of valuable cues which could be used to learn more about your consumer, what they care about, and potentially what some competitive threats are. Now, a little bit about how we collect our data. We measure a total census of the industry. We've built out a dictionary of over 100,000 properties globally that we pull down every single day to create rankings and industry benchmarks and tailored competitive sets for the brands that we partner with at social. And that's often used also to measure how all of your different social networks are performing relative to each other and how some messaging might be different on Instagram versus Pinterest. But we don't stop at that point with the creation of these kinds of metrics, although they're very important. Next, we process these social moments through a series of classification systems and models, which begin to expand on this context of how you can view creative, the place and the context and the different audience segments based on what's knowable in social. And just to give an example of what some of these models look like, it's a little bit to look at when you first go, but very broadly put, levers are sort of the big ticket items and the decisions and cues, things to do with which platforms are you placing your media on, where do you put your relative investments, and what kinds of creatives work in which circumstances. Focal drivers moderate all of the levers, and they're often the tactics of the specific campaigns themselves. And audience targeting is the layer across all of these focal drivers and levers. And these are some of the cues which you can glean from social data, things as simple as gender and location, all the way through to whether your brand or whether a social TV audience over-indexes in a particular category or with a particular advertiser. This can also be used to shed light on whether a customer is at risk because they've begun engaging with a competitor more heavily, and even down to the individual creative or the offer, which is actually causing them to potentially defect. And then finally, you can also use this to identify the profiles of the people who influence. And this has been talked about a lot at this conference. For us, this means the people who have the capacity to spark other kinds of actions, whether it's purchase or click among their social networks. And all of this drives towards each brand's particular view of ROI, either in the social context or more broadly across their marketing mix. So just to give a couple of examples where social data has actually been mobilized beyond the realm of social, more broadly across the business. Just up the top left, this is an example of a TV programmer's audience, which through the context of social, we learned actually over-index in the electronics and tech category and also with energy drinks. And if you imagine this data spun in a different way, this electronics advertiser could also look at social data in order to identify TV programs in which the audience is over-indexed with their brand or their category. Looking at the second example, just over here with the tiles, these are examples of brands which this brand's social audience also over-index in. And interestingly, in this example, it shed light on particular interests around music and sports, but there was also a competitor brand here, and they were able to actually dive in and understand what was causing this engagement, which was very new within this social audience. Oftentimes, you can look at social behavioural data to understand propensity to actually engage with a core brand. So whether by virtue of exposure to a TV campaign or even a social engagement campaign, whether the audience is actually more likely to engage with this brand before or after. And this is observed passively without survey, just through their actual behaviour. And then finally, all of the various optimizations across goals. And in this context, it was looking at which kinds of actions were very effective for driving clicks. So just to, I guess, summarize, we are sort of at the very beginning of taking everything that's measurable. The first step with social was how can we find some consistent metrics across social media and place it within a framework that's familiar, so social actions or impressions. But now we're actually beginning to see how brands can unlock what's knowable based on these platforms and apply them to broader business decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tania. Well, you can do it in 5 minutes. If you ever get another chance to do a VC Pres, you can do it in 5.
I love it.
Some really good stuff on there. So, questions from the jury, please.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approach the content classification and which languages you support.
Absolutely. So we measure all content globally. Currently, in terms of the nuances of natural language processing, we do English and Spanish. Portuguese is coming next because we've been growing our business in Brazil. But very simply put, I think at last count there was a series of 32 specific calls to action and then a variety of other promotional classifications or offers, and it's observed at the local market level. So, for example, there's a lot of strategy around asking people to share their opinions, but in Australia, where I'm from, we ask for that differently. So all of that is viewed at the local market within the language itself. Sure. Any other questions?
Can you talk a bit more about how you work with brands, and is it like a project or an ongoing basis?
Absolutely, wonderful question. So we're a SaaS syndicated platform. So everything about the sort of measuring what matters across social and diving into all of the syndicated attributes of your audience is all done within a dashboard. A lot of the instances now where brands are going, could I apply this to inform my TV buy, or could I apply this to different segments? That's often fed from our company through an API, and that sits within the brand system themselves where they've got their buying data and everything else.
Still got time for one more?
No?
We done?
Okay, thank you.
That was excellent. Tania Yuki from Shareablee. Thank you very much indeed, Tania.
Thank you.